Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. My name is Kentaro Toyama. I'm a faculty at the School of Information here at the University of Michigan. I'd like to thank the Center for South Asian Studies for hosting this talk, this conversation. And the faculty director of that center is Professor Matt Hull, who is in the audience. Thank you, Matt. I also want to thank all of the staff who have been helpful, Peggy in the back and Clementi, who's been helping us a lot. I don't know if Dohi is here, but she was also instrumental because Clementi had other things to attend to today. So it is my great pleasure to introduce the Venerable Tenzin Priyadarshi. He has done many things. I'm just going to touch on a few of those today. He is the founder and CEO of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values at MIT. And also, of course, a Buddhist monk who was ordained by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. And he is, generally very interested in finding ways to engage universities and people at universities in more ethical and compassionate action. He's been honored with a number of fellowships and awards, the Tribeca Disruptive Fellowship, a fellowship at Stanford University at their Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Science, as well as a Harvard Alumni Award. He has an interesting educational background, which we might hear a little bit about today, combining both learning through Buddhist teachers, both in Japanese and Indo-Tibetan traditions, as well as receiving a secular education. He did a degree in philosophy and physics and religious studies at Lemoyne College, and also a graduate degree in comparative philosophy of religion at Harvard University. So today we're going to be talking at least a little bit about his book, Running Toward Mystery, The Adventure of an Unconventional Life. We have a few copies in the back, which if anybody would like to purchase and have signed, we can do at the end. But otherwise, welcome, Venerable Tenzin.
Well, thank you. You have quite a memory. You remember all that.
You have to study a little bit, but yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for hosting me. I think we'll keep it rather informal, if it's all right. It's a delight to be here, and especially on this beautiful fall day. Technically, I'm based in Boston, but during the pandemic, I was in Arizona, so I have missed fall for the last almost 3 years now or so. So it was lovely when the plane was landing yesterday, and you could see the fall colors. It was quite beautiful. So no, thank you for hosting me. I don't know how much I should say about the book. Read it if you want to read it. Don't read it if you don't want to read it. It's a primary reason for being here was to have conversation with this old friend of mine, whose work I have admired for how long? You've known each other now?
15 years.
15 years or so. So I take every opportunity that I can get to stay in touch and talk about the wonderful things that he has started. This book is partly a memoir and partly just some reflections. When my literary agent asked me to write a memoir, my response was, I'm too young to do that. And I want the freedom to change my mind as often as possible between now and when I get really old. So what we sort of agreed on was to do a book that focused on some aspects of my life, but mostly certain learnings and interactions with teachers that I met along the way. And it's not just Buddhist teachers. It's also sort of other contemplatives, some well-known, some not so well-known, like a Benedictine monk that I had a tremendous relationship for past 25 years or so, Father Thomas Keating, and then Archbishop Tutu, who was also a mentor figure to me, and we lost him recently in December of last year. The book is Running Toward Mystery. It sort of begins with this episode of me running away. It's very literally running away when I was 10 years old. And it was driven by sort of some dreams and visions. And I'm a rather skeptical person myself, but that particular episode of my life I have struggled to sort of explain. So in the beginning, in the opening of the book, I mentioned that oftentimes we are driven to create a narrative that is either rational or irrational. But in human experiences, I think there's a room for non-rational, meaning everything that cannot be reasoned out does not mean that it's an impulsive, irrational decision. Although we are irrational for the most part, with a particular knack for rational storytelling. But this episode was quite non-rational. It wasn't intentional or anything. And I ran away from home, and after 2 days of train journey, I found myself at this hilltop, one of the things that was appearing in my dreams. And it happened to be a place where the historical Buddha used to teach. Now, I don't come from a Buddhist family. I come from a Hindu family. Half of it is culturally Hindu. The other half is observant. And the rest of them are atheists. So it wasn't sort of, the religious enterprise that drew me to this thing. But yeah, so I was there at this hilltop, and it felt like home. And I wanted to, there were a few caves there, and I was ready to spend the rest of my life in those caves. And then as the evening fell, and this is, I arrived around sort of 5 a.m. in the morning, spent the entire day on that hilltop, and then the evening, as it was happening, some forest security guards showed up with their AK-47s and all that, because that entire area is under protection of these forest services. And so these guys, they sort of had this very rough accent, and they said, "What are you doing here?" kind of thing. And then they heard my accent. Then the conversation became a bit civil. They realized that I was out of town boy and so on. And then they said, "Well, you really can't spend the night in the cave. There are cobras, and it's a wild forest. There are tigers and stuff, and it's really not safe. So why don't you go to this temple, on the adjacent hill?" So you had to do a climb and get to this other temple. So I looked up and I said, "Sure, I'll do that." So I climbed up, and it was a temple built by one of these Japanese orders that was founded by this gentleman who came to India in the 1930s and befriended Mahatma Gandhi, and sort of made India his second home kind of thing. So the funny thing that happened was, so I go to this temple, and I'm sort of all prepared to, tell them that, I'm just traveling. As a 10-year-old, I still looked a bit mature. The good thing about me was that from age 14 to 40, I looked like a 40-year-old. So not much change there. But I wasn't sort of, prepared for what was going to come next, which was I knocked on the door, and this monk opens the door, and he looks at me and he says, "Oh, we were expecting you." And my thing was, my response was, well, I'm here. You know? And we didn't go into any conversation. He didn't ask any questions of what brought me there and so on. And I kind of settled into the rhythm of this temple. And then 2 weeks later, I was found in the sense that within those 2 weeks, the newspapers in India had a photo of me as the missing boy, and somebody had seen me. So they called the number that was there, and then a bunch of people came and got me. The funny incident with that was that any major temple that I went to in India 2 years after that running away incident, the abbot would come out with a black and white photo of me and said, yeah, somebody came looking for you 2 years ago. And that's how we would generally start the conversations. But it's been a serendipitous journey, and the unconventional part of it is mostly sort of having had the benefit of maintaining some kind of open-mindedness, partly, again, instilled by some of my mentor figures, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who encouraged me to come to the US to pursue my interest in studying physics, and didn't see any qualms with an individual who was interested both in spirituality and scientific pursuits. Over the years, as I was telling Kantaro the other day, that I have a love and hate relationship with academia. When I was growing up in India, I had aversions to it, just because the way the system was set up. And I warmed up to the idea, and it's my 21st year at MIT, and still learning a lot every day. And it's been a nice journey so far. The book has a bit more substance than what I'm about to say, so feel free to explore, I guess. And then we'll, it talks a bit about the spiritual stuff. It talks a bit about challenges with religious institutions and trying to make sense of certain things. It speaks of interactions with indigenous leaders in Latin America and the work with them over the years. The center that I run at MIT has satellite programs in 10 countries, and one of them happens to be in Colombia. And the work there with the indigenous community has been sort of a wonderful learning interaction. So it sort of traverses all those fields. And of course, being a Buddhist monk, it goes a bit more into the philosophical framing about what sort of life it is that we seek, that we wish to live, and so on. Is that a good intro? Yeah. Okay.
Sounds great.
The book came out in the middle of the pandemic. It wasn't something that any of us had planned. And my editors were like, should we wait for a year before releasing it, because nobody knows how to market it during the pandemic. And I said, I wasn't planning on selling books anyway, so might as well release it. and maybe it'll be helpful to at least certain individuals. So this is just my sort of, I think, third talk on the book. I did one with Bob Thurman a couple of weeks ago in New York, and then one at Sundance, I think, a year ago or so.
Yeah, I'll just mention that I've read a reasonable amount of Buddhist books, both books about Buddhism as well as by people who are lay people who engage with Buddhism and so on. And I found your book to be this very unique combination of like you were saying, kind of your personal memoir and what you experienced, which is often incredibly just interesting in and of itself. as well as basically conveying certain things about both Buddhism and what you've learned through what you learned from your teachers. But let me ask you some questions about this,
Sure.
these things that you mentioned. There's a fantastic aspect of this thing that you did when you were 10 years old, right? I mean, you're 10 years old and you decided to leave home, basically, effectively running away as far as your family was concerned. There's the fantastic element, which is that, you used to have these dreams in which you saw images and people that eventually you came to meet or saw pictures of at this temple that you arrived at. But I'm very struck by this fact that at 10 years old, you would have this conviction that you knew that you wanted to do something, and it was different from what your family, which is they were Hindu and they believe in some degree of spirituality, but they're very secular in almost every other sense. So how did that? How did you feel that, and how did you know that this is the thing that you wanted to do?
I mean, honestly, I didn't. I didn't. I think the thing was that these dreams and stuff, they started happening when I was about 6, and I would try to talk to my folks about it, and their response was, "Stop reading comic books." And actually, it wasn't in any of the comic books that I was reading. It just so happened that by the time I was 10, it became quite intense, and the recurrence of it. And so, one morning I just decided to wake up and pack bags and leave, kind of thing. And I can't say that, not knowing where I was going, there wasn't a sense of conviction. It was just a curiosity of some sort. And all I knew, I wrote a note, basically to my folks saying, "Just let me be. I'm going on a spiritual quest," kind of thing. But I had no details where I'll end up or who I would meet or anything of that nature. And my parents, after they found me, thought that it was just sort of an early teenage episode that I was going through. So they were very patient. They waited 6 months, thought the phase will be over. Then they waited a year, and then they realized this wasn't going anywhere. That's when they started getting worried. To look at this. The thing is, if you look into, it's one of those things that if you look at sort of from a very conventional perspective, it's hard to make sense of it because you're trying to look at, psychological triggers or what might have sort of prompted these things. And I have gone through that exercise so many times internally and with many friends in brain and cognitive and behavioral science. I would love to have a rational explanation, but we haven't sort of, understood that part. But then if you look at the Buddhist worldview, there's some explanation. Again, it's an explanation. It's not necessarily an acceptable explanation at times, but it is. It is what it is, kind of thing.
And what do you mean by the Buddhist explanation?
The Buddhist explanation is mostly around the idea of rebirth and reincarnation, and looking at sort of memory as a continuity of things, and it's actually it's kind of, again, another serendipitous thing is that last time I had this conversation about memory and reincarnation and the universe was with a wonderful physicist friend who just got the Nobel Prize, Anton Zeilinger, who used to visit India quite often. And Anton is a quantum computational guy. Wasn't a very popular field, until a decade ago or so. And so we used to talk about, trying to get, make sense of how memory functions, and if we lived in a universe where, we could have sort of aspects of memory that goes beyond this physical process of death and things like that. And he would sit there, with his crazy curly hair, and he would be like, I think in the quantum world it might make sense, but we never sort of established an experimental sort of basis to it. But in the Buddhist world, this phenomena is common enough that it's worth paying attention to, and hopefully someday we'll have enough interest to study it in some ways.
And let me ask a question that might be more relevant for all of us here. Like, I'm guessing everybody who's here has some curiosity about these things, or has felt some, tug towards doing something that doesn't seem as, what their parents are telling them to do, basically. What do you tell people who, feel something like that? Obviously in your case it was very strong, and it was very clear to you that you should follow it, even though you didn't know where it would lead. Right. What about for those of us where it might be a little bit weaker, but it's still there?
I think the key thing is to maintain curiosity and a sense of discontentment with things around us. We are creatures of habit. We become very comfortable in the environment that we are in. And sometimes we take that environment to be the dominant worldview, thinking that the entire world looks like this or behaves in this kind of fashion. And the mystery part is that there's a lot that we don't know. And if we maintain a healthy sense of curiosity, there's a possibility that we might get closer to it. But it's not just the external knowing, it's the internal knowing, that we actually do not know much about ourselves. We have explanations, again, as I said, that we are rational storytellers, but there are all these other aspects of our behavior and thinking that we haven't explored very much, and so part of it is also a process of getting to know ourselves better, so that we can structure our lives in that particular manner, and it's sort of deliberately adding some contrast to your life, so you don't fade away in the conventional dominant narrative of what you believe in and the life that we are living.
Great. One of the things I see a lot in your book is, like for example, when you first arrived at Vulture Peak in Rajgir, and there's certain places that seem to have a certain amount of resonance. And then you mentioned this story about when you went to Colombia, and in the book it talks about how there's a relatively kind of, we would call it primitive, right? Group of community that is still extremely deeply spiritual in some sense, and they effectively called out to you when you happened to be in Colombia.
Well, that was again, talk about recent, wonderfully bizarre incidents. So, and this is recent in the sense that I think it happened like 10 years ago or so. So I was invited. So I'm involved with, some of the mediation and peace processes in Colombia. So I was invited by this university. Their claim to fame is that I think 40 or 42 out of their 45 Colombian presidents are graduates of this university. So it's quite prominent in the middle of Bogota, like a 400-year-old university. So they invited me to give a talk on something to, like a public talk or so on. And then I arrived there, and this was, a Bogota event, like it wasn't publicized outside of Bogota or anything. And then the Dean of Humanities at that time, also a wonderful guy, he sort of walks up to me, and this is like as I have come from the airport to the university. And he said, "Well, Tenzin, I have something to say, and I don't know how to quite say it." So I thought it was, some political stuff or something. And he said, "We have a messenger from this area that is, quite a trek away. It's called Sierra Nevada, near the Caribbean part of Colombia. And they don't use radios or phones or things like that, and they have deliberately sort of stayed away from civilization and so on. the messenger says that their spiritual elder, they're called mamos, that he had a vision that there was a man from the east, and describing this attire in Burgundy, is coming to Bogota. So he just sent this messenger on a hunt in the city of Bogota, that this person is about to come, go find him, and try to convince him to come visit us, because the spiritual elders don't leave the mountains. It's a group called the Arawaco tribe. So he was like, and somehow this messenger was talking to somebody, and they saw a poster of the talk, and they said, well, maybe it's this guy. Let's go to the university, meet the dean, talk to the guy. So it was sort of this very funny confluence of things. So I said, okay, I'll meet the guy, and he comes in, and he doesn't speak English or Spanish, so there was a professor in the anthropology department who spoke their tongue, and so this translation is happening. And then he's like, oh, will you come visit our spiritual elders? So I said, sure, not knowing anything about the geography of Colombia. And then the dean looks at me and says, I should warn you that you have to take a flight, and then it's about 3 hours of drive with no roads, So I said, I grew up in India, I can manage that. So I said, sure, let's the poor messenger made this effort to come all the way here, so let's do that. And then the faculty got interested. Then the dean was like, oh, can I join? The anthropologist like, oh, I've been trying to study these people and I can't go there. Can I join? So I was like, I don't want to shake any sort of status quo kind of thing. If the messenger says that we can all go, then it's fine. So I had a delegation, from the university of all the interested faculty members, and some of them, very skeptical of this whole conversation that just took place about visions and dreams kind of thing. And we all went, and they had these specially modified Toyotas with injection kind of thing, so the wheels can, go 72-degree angles sort of thing. And we arrived there, and then we had to walk for 3 hours. To meet these guys, and they were prepping for a welcome ritual the night before, sort of thing, and so I went there to meet these people, and he was a remarkable individual, and so I really wanted to know what happened, what prompted that. He said, no, it's a story in our tribe, and then suddenly, like couple of weeks ago, I started having this thing of you coming, and I said, could you see my face? And he said, no, I just saw the attire and the short hair kind of thing. So that's how it started. But it soon sort of became a conversation about spirituality and environment and so on, because these guys are custodians of one of the largest sort of untouched land in Colombia that various mining companies are trying to bid on. But what was interesting was the whole conversation then, well, there are two parts to it. I'll tell you the fantastical part of it first. So the fantastical part of it is these guys don't speak Spanish, right? They speak their own dialect. They just call it lengua, the tongue, right? So the conversation starts with the spiritual elder who I believe was in his 70s at that time, and there were 3 of them, talking to the person who was the translator from dialect to Spanish. The Spanish person, because I wasn't fluent in Spanish, so the Spanish person then speaking to somebody in English, another translator then getting to me. And then the same way I'll speak in English gets translated into Spanish, that gets translated into their tongue. 15 minutes later, we were just talking. Like the translation was happening, but neither of us were paying attention to it, and it was just sort of one of these. When I went back to MIT, I started asking all my linguistic friends that this was a very interesting phenomenon that we should try to study. And the anthropologists, they were puzzled because they saw the speed with which the interaction was taking place. The translators couldn't keep up, and we were just in the zone. But the other sort of the wonderful part of it was that sort of I highlight in this book is actually this whole notion of relationships. And his sense was that we actually, as humans, we are driven by relationships, but we have forgotten how to relate to things. And this took me back to one of these Indian philosophers, Krishnamurti, who sort of highlighted this idea that we have become very transactional in our relationships. Even what we characterize as the most loving relationships or caring relationships has become transactional. It's a lot about just give and take sort of thing. And the moment we recognize that there isn't much transaction to be had, we lose relationship, we lose interest in those relationships, or it weakens. And it's not just about material transactions, even about emotional transactions or transactions based on other kinds of needs and so on. Which sort of, prompts this question that, are we just wired to become consumers of things, including relationships? That we simply consume relationships. We don't know how to be in a relationship. And so, that sort of translated a bit into our relationship with the environment, the ecosystem, that we are simply consumers of nature. We actually don't know how to relate to environment. Once in a while, we may show some kind of reverence to nature, but it's still about consumption. It's about what I can get out of this thing. And that was sort of a profound sort of interaction, because looking at the lifestyles that these folks have and how they relate to nature was very sort of different from even conversations we were having in Cambridge about protecting the land and the environment and so on. So, yeah.
One of the things that I got out of the book is, all of these stories, like they kind of link together, but they paint this picture of a world that is, that we can't see, conventionally, but which kind of exists behind it. And at least for me, it's, it provides some hope that if we can all get in touch with that thing, whatever it is. And I'm also trained in physics, so it's like, how do you explain these things? And yet it's very deeply satisfying to feel that, yes, there's something that if we just learn how to get in touch with, it can help us out of what looks like a world that is really going down.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting anecdote that I didn't mention in the book. In early, I think it was late 70s, early 80s. So, the Dalai Lama, he has been sort of demonstrated this keen interest in science, and so even those days, so he was on a tour of Cornell University, and Carl Sagan was hosting him to give a tour of his lab. And so Carl Sagan is showing him around, and Sagan himself was, a phenomenal, curious individual. So he leans to His Holiness and he says, Your Holiness, this whole belief that you guys have about rebirth and reincarnation, what if we scientists come up with ample of evidence that it's not true, that it doesn't exist? And the Dalai Lama, without missing a beat, says, we'll give it up. And then the Dalai Lama turned to Sagan and he said, but what if we Buddhists come up with enough evidence that it exists? And Sagan could not reply. He could not respond. His wife later sort of mentioned that it stayed with him, and one of his last works that became a feature film, Contact, with Jodie Foster and all, it sort of shows echoes of that where he was trying to make sense that how can there be a significant chunk of population that has this worldview and demonstrates it in a certain way, but sort of we don't have very good physical explanations for it. So I'm still curious, whether we can verify it in other ways or not.
So connected to this, but which I think I'm going to pull a little bit towards things that I think are easier for conventional thought to kind of accept is multiple places in your book also you talk about your own experiences with different kinds of peace and stillness, right? So for example, one of your you mentioned your first retreat was when you were basically chanting sutras for 9 hours a day, things like that, and you mentioned how it was just so comfortable and peaceful and joyful for you. And then there's another story in this book where you had met a Tibetan meditation master. I think his name was Drubwang
Rinpoche, yes.
Yeah, Rinpoche. And he, it sounded like he brought your head in contact, and then you had this experience, which in the book just seems like just profound stillness and clarity. Can you describe for us a little bit, like, what do these, how can there be so many different levels of, stillness and calmness, and how does that feel, subjectively?
Yeah, I think, to borrow from this mentor friend of mine, Thomas Keating. So Thomas Keating observed almost 20 years of silence, he became quite a legend in his own rights. Founded the centering prayer movement in North America and so on. And so he used to say, silence is the language of God. Rest is all poor translation. Yeah. And it was this sort of interesting thing, because it wasn't the silence of the conventional world that we talk about, of just quietening the mind or not speaking or quietening the mental narrative kind of thing. But it was sort of this deep sense of stillness and silence of knowing things. And it occurs a lot, among the contemplatives. It's not that they get together and they talk about ideas. They just sit quietly. And then, they would sort of discover certain insights, and then they will speak about that. So there are different sort of levels of silence, not just abstaining from speech, but quietening the mind. But quietening the mind, even in a sense where it sort of quietens certain emotions, quietens certain sort of sensory experiences, and so on. And then there's this sort of entering into a state of deep stillness. And that deep stillness has nothing to do with being still only. You carry that sense of stillness even if you were watching that football match in the gigantic stadium of yours, to be still, sort of thing. And somehow, in the contemporary discourses on religion and so on, we have lost this contemplative aspect of what it means to be still, and this deeper sort of experience of quietude or quiet knowing kind of thing. So Drubwang Rinpoche, another remarkable individual. So he took a vow. There are practitioners within the Buddhist tradition, and not just in Tibet, but in China and other places. He took a vow not to lie down. So I think since the age of 15 or so, from what I'm told, and of course when I was with him, I saw it, he wouldn't lie down. So he would either be just walking, or he would be sitting upright in meditation. And I was a very sort of slightly mischievous, curious kid, as a young. So I would sometimes just open his door at 3 in the morning, to see if I'll catch him lying down, And it was just one of those things. I'll open the door, and he's just there. And he would just quietly open his eyes, and he'd just look at me, and then I'll just shut the door and then spin out. And he was this sort of profound meditator, but had this very fierce outlook, but the most gentlest personality. He had this very impressive dreadlocks, about this big. It sort of, over the years it accumulated. So he had this very sort of impressive physical presence, in robes, but with this gigantic dreadlocks, and his eyes crystal clear, like at all times. It didn't matter if it was 2 in the morning or afternoon or whatnot, and no interest in the material world whatsoever, and no interest in sort of thing. Like he would literally treat cash as paper, sort of thing. Like somebody gave him like $100 bill, he'll just pass it to the next beggar. He won't sort of hold on to things, so he was a remarkable individual. So I was invited, so he was visiting Sarnath. We were talking about Banaras, and there was a big prayer service in Sarnath, and Sarnath is where Buddha gave his first teaching on the Four Noble Truths about suffering and the causes of suffering and so on. And he, so I was invited to see him, and the Tibetan custom is sometimes that, they'll touch the forehead with one another. But he was a very senior teacher, and generally you don't do that with, young monks and senior teacher. And all I remember is him just grabbing my head, putting his dreadlock and forehead right on my head, and I just blanked out. And I don't even have any sense of how much time had passed or whatnot. But there was this deep sense of stillness. You see, like it was almost like being teleported, don't know where, but just complete stillness kind of thing. And then he puts my head back, and then I get like a little bit of awareness of where I am kind of again. And it's one of those things. Not sure what happened. And since I've been at MIT, anytime I have these kinds of experiences, I find somebody to talk to and say, can we work on this? Can we try to sort of make more sense of it? But I think that's also a challenge, in this human kind of thing, that what we know, how we know, what is convincing. Those are all very sort of differing nature of things. It's just useful to know that there are such experiences. Maybe we'll witness it, maybe we won't, but there are.
And again, if you read Buddhist texts about how to practice and so on, they explicitly say you should not get attached to these kinds of experiences.
Yes,
but
yes,
it also seems like, how do you not get attached to an experience like that of
to be able to, the whole idea with experiences is precisely not to let it sort of define us, kind of things. So again, it's one of those things that all of this sounds extraordinary from a certain perspective, but when you're hanging around with these people, this is day-to-day ordinary experiences. And the key thing is, if you find the experience inspirational, you use it for your own growth and development, and if not, you let it go, sort of thing.
I wanted to shift the discussion to your center at MIT. So, this, you've now been doing this for, it's been a while, at least 15 years, longer.
I think
about
years. 12 years or so.
12 years? Okay. But you were also a chaplain at MIT, so you've been at MIT for a while. Yeah. What's your hope for the center? What do you want to accomplish? What do you hope will happen?
So I think I mentioned to you, like the reason I started the center was not because I wanted to start a center. It was I was doing a tour of universities and colleges back in 2007, and one of the things that struck me, in those days, mostly I was being hosted by either computer science or philosophy department sort of thing, and we'll have these conversations. And I was sort of struck by the idea that there weren't many platforms where people could have conversations around ethics. Either if you were a philosophy major, you took Ethics 101, which was the most boring subject that philosophy has to offer. Or there were some sort of sociology of ethics, history of ethics kind of things. But then beyond that, there was not much conversation around it. And then the financial meltdown happened, 2008, 2009. And the media started asking all the schools of business that, whether we should even say that we are teaching leadership, right? We should just be content by saying we are training managers. And you start looking at sort of all these Ivy League graduates who were operating as bankers in Wall Street and so on. And so, as universities do, a lot of them responded with a reactionary thing about, let's do a pledge of ethics, like Harvard Business did, or let's start putting ethics curriculum. in place for things. Like on an average, a 2-year MBA program had 0 minutes on ethics, prior to 2009. After 2009, they started doing 2 hours on ethics, sort of thing. So that was a bit sort of disconcerting to me. So a few friends of mine at Sloan and we started designing these programs mostly for business leaders at that time, because the focus was on that. We were not interested in teaching normative ethics. We were not interested in doing ethics as a prescriptive kind of measure, but more like this whole idea of ethical imagination, that what does it mean to be virtuous? What does it mean to create a virtuous society, a virtuous world, and so on? That was sort of the start of it. And then since then, as I mentioned, that now we run programs for government agencies, Supreme Court judges, police forces, high school educators. So it has morphed into many kind of formats and operates in about 11 countries now. And so it's still an ongoing sort of iterative process, because as you may have noticed that in 2009 we were sort of talking about a leadership deficit, and that's the irony. I mean, we have gazillions of leadership development programs. If you look globally, there was never this much talk about leadership in academia and other circles 25 years ago, 30 years ago even. But there's a tremendous amount of leadership deficit, meaning good leadership is hard to come by. And we are still sort of struggling with that issue. So the hope of the center is to at least try to sort of bring about some more thoughtful, reflective form of leadership, if not in the current generation, at least for the next generation, and sort of put efforts there. So.
And especially since you do work a lot with academics, with researchers and scientists, what do you think, if anything, that kind of secular researchers could be doing more of that they're not, especially with respect to ethics?
I think to instill some idea of why and what in the curriculum is an important component to doing things. Meaning that it shouldn't be just because we can create something, let's do it. And that's sort of another kind of a telling thing, I think, especially in the scientific communities. Especially things that are posing as a way to change systems in a large degree, like we were talking about algorithms, machine learning algorithms, and certain kinds of AI ventures. That there needs to be some sort of conversation about, at the design level. Not, we need to first make a distinction between ethics and compliance. I'm not into compliance. That's the job of the legal folks. But the thing is, by the time we get to compliance, it's too late for ethical ventures at times. Because all we know about compliance is how to adhere with it or find loopholes so that we don't get into trouble. My sort of emphasis is to look at ethics as design level and to basically say that, given these parameters, what can we do that might better the product or better this particular kind of platforms. And more importantly, whether we should venture into it or not, just because we can. So those are the kinds of, I think, conversations that we need to sort of do. It's kind of, we are sort of in the middle grounds. It's like, yes, there is unethical aspects of things that we see across different societies, but also, the other extreme is self-righteousness. We live in a world where, it's very easy to become self-righteous. It's very difficult to be ethical in certain ways, to be able to hold the other side with similar sort of stature and reverence and have sort of civic conversations about the good of humanity, the good of the world. That's a difficult platform to hold at times.
Great, thank you so much. Let me open it up to questions from the audience, if any. go ahead. And maybe introduce yourself and say hello.
I'm Deborah. Happy to be here. Thank you, Venerable. I have read your book a couple weeks ago, and I was really touched in the beginning of this conversation. It seemed like you had a calling, something that pulled you when you were 10, and some part of you knew where you were going, and some part of you didn't know where you were going. And your telling today is that you were found, but I'm also feeling like you were never lost.
You should talk to my parents.
This is what's interesting about perspective.
Right.
And then, now we're, like, with the conversation moved to ethics and your work at the center. And I think my question is really open-ended about this lost and found dynamic. And, like, here's this childhood story, but then here's also this realm of exploring and trying to find our way in terms of ethical direction, behavior, how does that connect with leadership. So it's very open-ended. If there's anything in that you feel like you could talk to, fine, and if not, I understand.
I think it's okay to be lost at times. And lost has the feeling of being lost has different implications. One of those feelings of being lost is the sense of insecurity. We devise all these security narratives around ourselves to tell ourselves that things will be fine, life is going well, and so on. And pandemic is a great example of how our security narratives came collapsing in certain ways, right? That we were forced to reckon with not knowing. We were forced to reckon with uncertainty at different levels. We were forced to question what we knew already, and so on. So I think it's an interesting sort of way to question our own security narratives in our lives, personally, professionally, and so on. And to sort of be able to embrace this sense of uncertainty of things, and that is sort of one of the key things about Buddhism, that change, uncertainty, impermanence. These are not Buddhist concepts. Even if you're not a Buddhist, all these things will happen to you. You'll be forced to face it, deal with it, reckon with it, and so on. And so all that certain contemplative tools or practices train us or tell us about is how to embrace it better, so that we are not shattered in the face of such experiences. That I think the only time you're found is when you're enlightened. Up until that, we are just too busy creating all these false identities about who we are, what we are, and so on. We are lost in a world of false identities that way. Please. That way you will never get to ask your question. But go ahead.
You were guided from childhood by your visions, and you have done a lot since then. I read the book too, and you met all these people. Each person brought you a little further along, and the parents you had made sure that you got the education. All these things bring you where you are now, and you're still a young man. Do you still feel like whoever brought you here made you run away and had you meet all these people and do all the things you are doing, that is still with you and it's still carrying you forward on whatever your mission is, if that makes any sense?
I don't know if it is who or what kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the key thing is that it has sort of persuaded me to maintain a level of openness about things, people that I meet, places that I visit, and so on. And so I'm not sort of quick to say that, oh, I don't want to have this conversation, or I don't want to meet these individuals and so on. And I'm sort of very curious individual, try to maintain that. Sometimes I don't even try to know who I'm talking to initially. This is getting recorded, so I won't tell you all the intimate stories of things. But because of being this open, like I have had conversations with people who are completely opposite of how I would be thinking or how I would be thinking. But then you get some shared perspectives on certain things. So yeah, I would say the drive is still there. I still sort of, one of the ways that I maintain that is I do deeply question on a regular basis my own trajectory and whether I want to be doing what I'm doing or not. And almost borderlining at times self-doubt, but not quite self-doubt. But when I say that I deeply question on a regular basis what am I doing, why I'm doing it, is that it has an element of radical honesty with it, because it's not that I need to do it. I don't need to be here. I don't need to be doing these things. And that allows for certain degree of openness and being to sort of maintain this suspended state in some ways.
Robert?
So I'm Robert. I'm a PhD student in the School of Information. Kentaro was actually my advisor. So I'm struck by the title of this book, Running Toward Mystery. And why I'm struck by it is it seems as if, as a scientist and as someone who has a spiritual center as well, if there's friction that exists between different ways of running toward mystery, in the sense that from a scientific perspective, running toward mystery may be for the goal of understanding or dissecting or taking apart, but from the spiritual trajectory, that running toward mystery may be to embed oneself in mystery and not to solve, or not, but simply to exist in the space that the mystery is presented. So these transcendent experiences, that it's not so much of explaining how it happened or why it happened or whatever, but simply to be in it. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, those two different types of maybe running toward mystery, and how to find balance between living in mystery, or the space of mystery, and the attempt to maybe have that scientific perspective.
Well, that's a great question. I think, firstly, a qualifier about mystery itself. Primarily, the reason for using mystery was to highlight the notion of unknown, meaning how many unknown variables actually exist, both in our lives and in the universe, right? And we try to solve for it, but we never quite get the bigger picture of what it is that we are solving for. We get tidbits of data about things that we are trying to solve for. But in terms of our personal lives, about that sense of unknown is that, and I mentioned it in the opening chapters of the book, that this term, this expression that we colloquially use of fear of unknown, okay, that it's actually an illogical expression. Okay. It's fear of leaving the known. Unknown is an unknown. But when we associate the word fear, it's not about fear of unknown or fear of mystery and so on. It's fear of leaving what is known, the domain that we have so sort of internalized and identified with it, and so on. So mystery, in that sense, both presents an invitation and a challenge to leave the familiar territory, whether it's knowledge domain, behavioral domains, and things of that nature, to get there. Now, with regards to, it's not so much about trying to explain the mystery, but there is a deeper sense of knowing. And when you look at the contemplative literature, from various times, they would speak of it as knowing. Like if you look at early desert fathers, even in the Christian tradition, their expression was "be still and know." So it's not that they're anti-knowledge or anti-knowing. It's a question of what form of knowing. Say. Again, if you look at us, we are driven in some ways by, again, to extend this argument about transactional sort of sense. Especially today, I think much of our knowledge is driven by a utilitarian function, right? For no other reason, but just that what is it that we can do with this knowledge? I used to teach a course for a number of years at MIT called Principles of Awareness. And as an interview, there were 150 or so students who would apply, only 20 would get in to the program. And one of the key things of how we would filter out is whether this person was just interested in the utilitarian aspects of knowing or not. Meaning that all they were interested, and this is partly engineering mindset, but partly other thing, all they were interested in is how do I apply what I learned from this class, into a bigger research or a bigger project or something that I'm interested in, which sort of counters certain kind of aspect of just knowing, of just learning in some way. So I would say, there is a deep sense of knowing, but it's not always this utilitarian driver of why we wish to know it, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Great. Ravi, I've been here at faculty in the business school here. I haven't read the book. I want to connect a few things. Towards the end, you talked about ethics in business school, and things like that, and it's kind of too late at that time to talk about ethics. So
Of course.
looking at the mental health crisis, I want to connect that back to what we're seeing in society today, and people wonder, this has to be addressed at a much earlier stage.
Of course.
And what are, this whole kind of conversation, whether we can bring secular education. That's the tension, right? At the same time, there's this op-ed piece that everybody above 60 should be tested for anxiety.
Yes.
Right? So I just want to hear your thoughts about how to kind of start building this. Is that a parental role? Obviously, parents have a role, but is it more an institutional role? How could this be done? It's a pretty sad stage. Really.
It is. It's a very sad state, and we are still, I think, as academia, we are still sort of just reacting to, certain sort of major events and incidents that occur in this landscape. I mean, first thing is, the reason this Center for Ethics is able to operate in 10 countries is because the programs are secular. Yes, it is a Buddhist monk running it. Yes, it has the Dalai Lama's name. But there are other Nobel Peace Prize winners who were part of it. And the reason, I was actually very skeptical about giving it the Dalai Lama's name. The reason we gave it Dalai Lama's name were two. As it happens in academia, that if you are a large donor, your name goes on the thing. And I was actually worried. I was really worried that some individual give large chunk of money and their name would go on the center and it'll immediately lose credibility, on the thing. So I had these, 6 Nobel Peace Prize winners who were sort of the founding members and mentor figures, and we were talking about this thing. And I told them that, if I give it Dalai Lama's name, people will think it's, first thing is whether the Dalai Lama wants to give his name or not. But it'll have this, religious overtone kind of thing. So in 2008, the European Union did a survey of prominent world leaders who could be sort of inspiring figures. And the Dalai Lama topped the chart, right? And so Desmond Tutu was the one who said, there is your response. He's not just a religious figure in the secular world. He's sort of the top inspiring leader. So you should give the center his name. But most of the programs, we have been very cautious to sort of have it as secular as possible, in things. In fact, sometimes people are disappointed that it is so secular, because they come in expecting some religious leaning, because we have contemplatives also as part of the center and so on. Now here's the thing, I agree with you that by the time we get people in college, it's a bit late to have any conversation around ethics. They're already sort of prone to certain ways of thinking, certain ways of looking at the world, and so on. The challenge becomes that as civic society, we can't agree on whose responsibility it is to instill character in kids. You see? So when we were running these programs from middle school, teachers and educators, they were all like, no, but this is what the parents should be teaching them. This is not our role. Like if we start as a teacher to teach some of these things, the parents will get up in arms. And the parents were like, no, but our kids spend more wakeful hours with you guys in school systems than with us. We are working, we are spending only a couple of hours, and they go to school to learn, so these should be part of common learning kind of thing, I say. So as civic society, we can't agree on whose responsibility it is, and we are too shy because of, again, various excuses of so on to take a shared responsibility around these things. The second thing is that institutions that have actually done this thing historically haven't done a good job at it, because they were primarily the religious institutions. And they mostly sort of did this normative sense of ethics. So it would lead to sort of a mindset of self-righteousness, of I am right, you're wrong kind of thing, rather than how do you sort of look for ethical framing in complex society sort of thing. So I do think that there's tremendous need for that. The good thing is that there's opening around those things. Like people are interested, parents are interested in learning it, in knowing about it and so on. But we have to get started somewhere. That's one thing. And the other challenge that Kentaro and I often talk about is the challenge of scaling up. Ethical learning can't be just any other sort of skill building at this stage. So you can't sort of teach a MOOC course and reach 100,000 kids around ethical decision making. You can do that with compliance framework. You can do that where it's true and false statements. But to change mindsets, takes a bit of time. And I remember we used to play this game because MIT faculty and we love playing games. And when we started this thing, so this is, mind you, this is 2009. Newspapers are flashing, what is wrong with the business world kind of thing. And we are running this program, and we used to time the students. And these are mostly MBAs or people who have left C-level to come back to get a year of business learning experience kind of thing. And we'll ask things like, what are the qualities that you think should drive a business leader? And this is 2009. Right? On an average, and we ran it at several places, this program, several business schools. On an average, it would take them 1 hour and 7 minutes to 1 hour and 20 minutes of prodding to come up with things like honesty and kindness should be part of business leadership. They will go for the same thing, about strategy, about vision and things, but honesty, kindness, which is all that media was talking about that entire year. You see, it wouldn't occur. And when they came to that recognition, right? So we'll pause, and we'll say, by the way, did you recognize that it took you about 1 hour and 20 minutes to get to this? They would get angry. They would get angry, and they would say, well, you didn't ask the question about leadership, you said business leadership. And so immediately, you see where the compartmentalization occurs in them. And so that's the thing that I think there's a long way to go in some ways. And I think that academic institutions do need to start early. So I do mean by early childhood education and so on. But at the same time, I think universities need to do their role and sort of having more programs around this thing. If we actually do believe in sort of formation of leadership sort of ideas. So.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
My undergraduate definitely formative years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder whether when you talk about scaling, is there a way to embed ethics? Purpose draws more attention.
It does. It does. It does. But purpose, unfortunately, also has too much storytelling involved with it. Right. No, so I mean, when we run the programs for, say, leaders in tech sector in Silicon Valley and other places, purposefulness is one of the avenues with which we approach this thing. But it's still been a challenge. Sometimes on individual level they will understand that, but how to bring it into an organization is another struggle at times.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to hear what you say.
Well, thank you.
I've not read the book, as we are sitting here, we are traveling at a staggering speed, both around an axis and around a local star. And everything is moving. So when you say we are, there is something behind something else, is only because we have ourselves pulled the curtain, not to see what is actually happening constantly. We know it. They tell us with physics, but do we actually believe this? That we are traveling at a staggering speed.
Yeah.
So when you speak about some sort of ethics that can lead us, somewhere, that somewhere is our own making. It has very little to do with what nature is taking us to.
Right.
So this ethics has to have some sort of a relationship to this natural faith or
Yeah. Well.
You touched upon it, that you were in this group of natives that called upon you to come and speak with them and so forth, and that they have such a sense of nature, some connection, so connected to nature, and perhaps others were not when they were coming to see or heard them. Isn't that because that we don't consider nature as a teacher or as a nature doesn't have any ethics?
Yes. Nature is amoral.
Amoral.
Yeah.
Aethical.
Yeah.
We are putting our ethics upon it.
Yes. So here.
One thing I want to say is Buckminster Fuller made an analogy of oil, and he said that it takes thousands of years for the planet, or he called it our spaceship,
Right.
to make this 1 gallon of oil, and it costs nature $1 million at the energy, time, pressure, so forth and so on, and it costs
Average consumer $1.17.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it costs. So what does it cost nature to do it
Right.
is completely outside our understanding.
Right.
Or our implementation of this sort of ethics. Why don't we look at what it costs nature instead of what it costs J.P. Morgan to run something?
Right.
So, but it starts at the point where it's we have to believe we are all traveling.
Well, so there are a couple of things. First thing is that, yes, nature is amoral. And that's why we need to understand that there should not be absolute moral principles. But when we are talking about, species, interaction with species, and dominance of certain kinds of species, part of it is that we do need to set certain parameters, because species by nature are also not very gentle to each other at times. That's how the whole nature is not the kindest at times. In its raw feature, minus all the avatar overlays on the thing. But the key thing is around it is that we need to change certain aspects of our own perception about each other and about nature that allows for maximum flourishing of both sides in some ways. Humans are useless in certain ways, right? Useless in the sense that the planet will go on, the nature will go on, and we contribute less than a tree does to nature. So we know that from a human perspective, those calculations don't pan out very well. So, but the key thing is coexistence here, and for that we need to, I think, try to figure out ways in which we can understand certain principles, such as kindness, such as compassion, that drives the society and policies in certain ways. The other part of it is, knowing the nature of things does not always, at human level, translate into behavioral stuff at times. I'll give you an example. Varanasi, the city that we were talking about. So we were doing a conversation with a few scientist friends, and there was this physicist who was with us, and he wanted to withdraw some money. So he went into one of these ATMs, and the ATMs there are notorious for eating up your card. They don't give the card back, right? So this guy, who was a physicist, a particle physicist nonetheless, puts his card in, and the card is not coming out. So he's shaking the machine, he's yelling at it, and the card is not coming out. Then he starts kicking the machine, and still the card is not coming out, and so on. And so you could see he was visibly upset and angry and all this thing. And then it came out, and I was observing this thing, and then we were taking a walk. We said, we'll talk to the bank manager the next day, because it was the weekend, about this. So I looked at him and said, you've spent your entire life studying particle physics. He said, yes. He said, you do realize that neither that ATM card of yours nor this machine exists in this way. Meaning, this is the way he described it, the thing that it's card, like at the end of the day, it's a bunch of electromagnetic forces. It's not like a. I was like, how is it that such things can drive so much anger in you? Despite of the fact that the principles, that this does not exist, in the way. Kicking the machine, yelling at it, swearing at it, these are not the way a physicist should be responding to an ATM machine. Is it? But you clearly see the dichotomy between what we know versus how we internalize it in our behavioral manifestations of things. And that's where I think at times we recognize that our learning has a long way to go in terms of what we know versus how we are manifesting ourselves. So. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, how are you? I wanted to ask you about, meditation is kind of having a resurgence
Right.
all kinds of
Yeah,
ideas
yeah.
that both kind of dualistic and non-dualistic,
Yeah, yeah.
very mechanical. And you were talking about ethics earlier, and I was just kind of wanted to get your opinion about this idea of these really powerful techniques of meditation and the things that they can offer someone in multiple dimensions of their lives, but that being kind of divorced from the ethic, Buddhist ethics,
Right, right.
which for me personally, I discovered that they really don't seem to function well without each other.
Right.
Well, I should say, you could probably have Buddhist ethics without meditation, but I don't know if you could have it the other way
Right,
around.
right.
So I was just curious about your thoughts around that.
I mean, this is again, we were having this conversation earlier. You know, when I was on sabbatical this 1 year at Stanford, I was telling Kentaro this morning that I got tired of all the meeting requests for meditation apps. Everybody had a new idea about designing a meditation app and so on. And then after 2 weeks, it was just like I brought a bunch of them into a room and I said, because it was all about, I want to change the world and I want to promote well-being and I want this app to be successful and I want it to be the next unicorn, $1 billion enterprise, right? So all of this, happening in the same sort of vein of thinking kind of thing. And so I told them, forget about your $1 billion enterprise, but just the simple motivation that you do recognize that bringing users again and again to your app implies a certain kind of algorithm that will promote addiction and dependency. And even, meditation is a spectrum. There's no one kind of meditation per se. But even the most fundamental kind of meditation is designed to free you, sort of not encourage this kind of dependency. So you do understand that it's hard to sort of, for them to coexist regardless of the narrative you have in your head about, a successful meditation app that promotes social well-being and things like that. So I don't think most people get it still, because I think they're, trapped in their own sort of sense of, what sort of temporal benefit versus ultimate benefit of meditations are. And having said that, Buddha himself, the historical Buddha himself, sort of talked about 3 higher trainings, ethics or ethical guidelines being one of them, meditation, and then wisdom. That all these 3 should be cultivated in tandem, sort of thing. But what happens with human mind is that we are able to, it's partly our attention span that we just want to focus on something and become expert on one of those things. So either you become an ethicist or you become a meditation teacher or you become, somebody who's scholarly about Buddhist knowing. But none of it defines a good practitioner. In the art of practicing meditation. So all of these are important, and I think in today's world, ethical framing is important, as it was important even during the time of the Buddha, but today more so, because again, you look at it and you look at the landscape of meditation or mindfulness, whatever you want to sort of label it. There's tremendous noise around it. Again, like the word leadership, there's tremendous noise around it. There are gazillions of meditation programs. There are more teachers of meditation than there are students of meditation. And let's say, even in conservatively speaking, this has been the trend for last 20 years, 25 years. Has the world become much more kinder? Has the world become much more still? Has the world become, more civil? No. And again, each one of these groups would like to argue and say, well, we bettered something in this way, kind of thing. But these are all sort of temporal metrics of things. So it is important, to sort of focus on all aspects of what makes a good meditative mind in some ways.
Your comments about ethics, I was thinking about the engineer's ethics.
Uh-huh.
That action which produces
Yes. True, true, true. Very true. You know, it was, you know, I had a group of students some years ago. So they did this, you know, one of these basic sort of genetical modification. So, you know, this E. coli bacteria, E. coli. So it smells pretty bad. And they, like rotten banana sort of thing, as they describe it. And so they changed the structure of it. So when it decayed, it started smelling like spearmint, kind of thing. You know, and you know, it's quite a remarkable accomplishment for a bunch of undergrads to do that. So they went on, you know, radio shows and things of that nature. And there was this one radio show where the person was, "Why did you do it?" And this entire group, pin drop silence. And then one of them says, "'Cause we could." and you know, later on we had this conversation with them, and they were like, "Yeah, you know, it's like we seldom sort of look at the why of things. You know, even whether it's designing robots and things like that, we know certain principles that are driving it, but we are not looking at the bigger picture of things." Yeah, yeah, yeah.
By one engineer at GM.
Right.
Produced a, you know, great detriment to the environment.
Yep.
No ethical consideration at all involved in it.
No, and that's the challenge of these things, that, you know, especially these days, because we scale things up so quickly, that if we don't tackle with these things at the design, at the nascent stage, it becomes too expensive and too costly and almost impossible to turn back after you have deployed a product or deployed a particular kind of program around it. So in the long run, it is detrimental.
Maybe one last question.
I would argue that most human beings are actually ethical. And even the engineer who designed anything that we today might find a problem was not thinking, or was not able to think through all the possible harms that came with it. And I actually go back to, where do we teach ethics? I think that the responsibility of ethical teaching sits with people who have to make complex decisions. And it's the business leader at GM or whoever to think about what is the impact of all our actions rather than the engineer who's inventing something. Because the why has to come when you're making it sort of so expansive that the impact is multiplied, not when you're in the state of just discovery for the sake of discovery.
So, I mean, I mean, that is the dominant view, I would say, and there are inherent problems with that view, like the gentleman brought up early on. First thing is that it's a presumption to think that people can make ethical decisions if they're not trained in it. And part of the challenge is that most of these business managers were never trained in any kind of ethical framing of things. So all they're looking at is numbers and legal sort of framing of things. The second thing is that, you know, the world is a blurry place when it comes to, you know, borrowing your term of complexity. There are no strictly engineers. There are no strict business managers. You know, and in certain industries, you know, you see that a lot. You know, people who are, especially in the world of tech, you know, some were trained as engineers, many were not, but they're still venturing into those kinds of things. And the question becomes, at times, is that the scale with which at least some of the emerging technologies are occurring, you know, it all becomes an issue of how do they recuperate costs of R&D. And they're willing to let go of certain things, even at the cost of, you know, the damage to civic society. You know, you look at, for example, application of machine learning algorithms in criminal justice system in the US. No, it should have happened at the design stage, where people should have looked at the data and said, you know, these algorithms that we are training on is on a historically biased data, and probably not a good idea to give it to judges in Texas and other places where it doubles down on racial biases and things of that nature. So I think, you know, that is an issue. There's an issue with engineering itself as a discipline, I do believe. You know, after 9/11, I think it was in Chicago, the Fundamentalism Institute that studies sort of religious fanatics. They did a study and they realized that most educated religious fanatics are engineers by training. And you look at it, and you look at, for example, Aum Shinrikyo, the most problematic of all the cults in Japan. They had 2 PhDs. Most of these members were double PhD in chemistry and physics or biology and other kinds of things. And it tells you something that inherently needs to be revised in the system of learning itself. You see, that it's not just about blueprints. It's about figuring out alternate models and why people should adhere to these kinds of systems.
So, my argument was, maybe I didn't make it clear, is that we can't expect to start with the school, but this is where universities actually have to play a role.
Yeah.
Because this
Yeah.
is sort of our university responsibility.
It is. It is.
People,
Yeah.
Graduate from here and go on to make, great products.
Right.
Which can have significant harm that comes from it.
Right.
And it's our responsibility to teach that in our university, so students think through all the steps.
That is true. That is true. No, I definitely second that, and at least to make them pause and think about some of these things, because industry doesn't make them pause and think. After this, it's all free fall. So, yeah.
All right. Well, it's past 6
Oh.
o'clock. Yeah.
Maybe one last question.
One
Yeah.
last question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in terms of university, I wonder why that's like, UMich, we have like, general education kind of requirements for a lot of, especially like STEM field and stuff like that.
Right.
And I was wondering if instead of just having it as like a class that you pass basically, so people just sort of, they cruise through it, they don't really pay
Right.
much attention to it. I wonder if we make it like a large part of the grade, and that makes people pay more attention to it, and maybe also sort of enforce a little bit on how the teachers sort of teach their curriculum.
Sure. Sure.
to,
Sure. Yeah.
sort of make that.
No, it's. I think it's important. I have been against ethics being a required subject in universities, because then the students have this sort of attitude that it is required, and I need to do it.
Backfires.
So the retention level is rather low in terms of what they study, kind of thing. But not always. Ethics is not always an attractive subject as well. Unless you're sort of deeply thinking about social issues and so on. But I think it's it could be made more interesting. We have been experimenting, at least for middle schoolers, not lecturing on ethics, but designing video games, where they sort of understand in complex interaction and immersive environment about ethical decision making. But we need to sort of devise new ways, and I think it's important that at least there's one class at the university that every student goes through that sort of raises these kinds of questions. And I think it would be ideal, of course, if it is integrated in most classes. So when you are studying robotics, it's not just about robotics, but there's some module of it that is devoted to that. If you're studying, medicine, that there's some module of it that is devoted to sort of the ethical framing issues of things. And I think, there's every subject from literature to history to anything that you can actually embed a module of ethics.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Venerable Tenzin.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
It was delightful. Thank you so much.
There are 5 copies of the book that I have, which if you would like to purchase, you can, and Venerable Tenzin will sign them as well, since we are doing a bit of a big signing, and then after that we'll go. But thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming.